Contrary to what he often suggests, Trump's poll numbers have never been particularly good. Trump had lower approval ratings than any previous president in his first term, and his second term seems to be following a similar trend, with Nate Silver's poll aggregator currently giving him a net approval rating of about -10, slightly above where he was in his first term, but still lower than any of his other predecessors. Trump is now underwater on basically every issue, including immigration, which used to be something of a strong suit for him, and deep underwater on economic issues like trade and inflation. Nonetheless, the silver lining for Trump and Republicans here is that, as unpopular as they might be, Democrats aren't doing any better. Wall Street Journal polling carried out in July, for instance, found that the Democratic Party had a net favourability of -30, with an astonishing 63% of respondents saying they have an unfavourable opinion of the party, and just 33% saying they have a favourable opinion. These are apparently the worst numbers for the Democrats in 35 years, and 19 points lower than the Republican Party, which recorded a net favourability of -11 in the same poll, with 54% of respondents saying they had an unfavourable opinion of the party, and 43% saying they had a favourable opinion. The latest polling by Gallup, conducted around the same time, isn't much better. They found that just 34% of Americans had a favourable view of the Democrats, 4 points less than the 38% who said they had a favourable view of the Republicans. Not only is this the lowest figure ever recorded by Gallup, it's also the reversal of a long-running historical trend. As you can see from this graph by data journalist G. Elliott Morris, which basically compares the Democrats' net favourability to the Republicans, for the past 30 years or so, Democrats have generally been perceived more favourably than Republicans, save for a brief period after 9/11. So in this video, we're going to explain why the Democrats are still quite so unpopular, and why it might not matter for the midterms as much as you think. In the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, we dive deep into the current state of America, discussing our real thoughts on the state of American democracy, soft power, universities, and the countries that could steal their crown, from China to the EU. Find out more about Too Long, the End of the American Order, by clicking the link in the description. So let's get straight into it. One of the big reasons Democrats are doing so badly in the polls is that they're actually doing surprisingly badly with more left-wing voters, who, despite identifying as Democrats, frequently tell pollsters they have an unfavourable view of the party, presumably out of frustration at the muted reaction to Trump so far. You can see this if you dig into the polling. That Gallup polling we mentioned a second ago, for instance, also found that Democrats are faring far worse with their own voters than Republicans. Only 73% of Democrats apparently have a favourable view of their own party, compared to 91% of Republicans, with Democrats generally being more critical of their own party in Congress than Republicans, although that gap apparently narrowed somewhat in late July. Other polling suggests this is at least in part because the most left-wing voters in the Democrat coalition are frustrated with their party. Verisight polling from July, for instance, found that about 20% of the Democrats who call themselves very liberal have an unfavourable view of the party, while only 8% of Republicans who call themselves very conservative have an unfavourable view of the GOP. While it would obviously be better from the Democrats' perspective if they were getting on with their base, there's nonetheless somewhat of a silver lining for the Democrats here, in that super liberal voters will probably still end up voting Democrat at the midterms. This is why Democrats still hold an advantage when it comes to generic ballot polling. In other words, when respondents are asked who they're going to vote for at the midterms. Despite their appalling favourability ratings, YouGov currently gives the Democrats an edge in the congressional ballot. And that Wall Street Journal poll we mentioned, the same one that gave the Democrats their worst net favourability in 35 years, still put them 3 points ahead of the GOP when it came to congressional voting intention. Similarly, Gallup polling found that Democrats now have a 3-point edge when it comes to which party voters most identify with 46% saying the Democrats and 43% saying the Republicans. This is essentially because even if more left-wing voters don't like the Democrats at the moment, they like Trump's GOP even less. And polling suggests they're planning to hold their nose and vote Democrat at the midterms anyway. Nonetheless, even if some of the gap in favourability between Democrats and Republicans is explained by the fact that left-wing Democrats are more critical of their own party than right-wing Republicans are, this still doesn't fully explain why the Democrats are just generally so unpopular. And this brings us on to our second reason. The Democrats aren't faring much better with centrist voters or independents either. Gallup, for instance, found that just 27% of independents say they have a favourable view of the Democratic Party, 1 point lower than the 28% who say they have a favourable view of the Republicans. These are, to be frank, pretty rubbish numbers for both parties, and this is the lowest percentage of independents expressing favourable views of either party since December 2013, suggesting that many independents currently feel politically homeless. Why independents feel so negatively towards the Democrats is hardly a mystery. For starters, Democrats are generally seen as ineffective, with only about 35% of voters saying they think Democrats can manage the federal government effectively or bring about the change America needs. But on top of that, Democrats trail Republicans on most big policy issues. According to that Wall Street Journal polling, for instance, voters think congressional Republicans are more able than their Democrat peers to handle the economy, inflation, tariffs, immigration, illegal immigration, and foreign policy. Democrats enjoy slight leads on certain issues like healthcare and vaccine policy, but neither of these are really top priorities for voters at the moment, and are unlikely to increase in salience much before the midterms. Now, this might come as a bit of a shock, given that, as we mentioned in the intro, Trump himself is well underwater on most policy issues. But this partly reflects the fact that, for the moment, congressional Republicans are apparently more trusted on most policy issues than Trump personally. This suggests that, in the short term, Democrats would be well advised to focus on Trump and try to frame the midterms as a referendum on his presidency. But in the longer term, repairing the Democratic brand will require coming up with a political agenda that should, ideally, appeal to both disenfranchised leftists and uncertain independents. Now, when you're diving into complicated topics such as this, it's quite easy to get caught up in what you know without even missing a beat. But what about the stories you don't see? Or what happens when the stories you do see are purposefully leaving out information to try and sway your thinking? Thankfully, our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at helping with just that. Ground News is a website and app that collects thousands of articles from around the world and puts them all in one place for you to easily compare how news is being covered by different outlets online. For each and every story, you can see the number of sources reporting on it, as well as the political bias, factuality, and ownership of said sources. For example, if we take this story on a recent poll finding that many Democrats consider their party weak and ineffective, you can see that there are 145 sources reporting on it, with 28 of them coming from the left and 13 of them coming from the right. You can even compare the headlines to see what either side is saying, with the left-leaning outlets emphasising Democrats' internal frustration and self-critique, in contrast to the right, which instead frame the Democrats' woes as a reaction to Trump's apparent success. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of super handy features. Our personal favourite is their blind spot feed. Here you can find stories that have been disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum, helping you challenge your perspective on someone else's media reality. Here at TLDR, we're passionate about helping you understand how bias may affect the media you consume, something Ground News also firmly believes in. Because of this, we're offering 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. You can only access this discount through our link, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started today.